Hello, in this video, we're going to talk about neurulation. This is an embryology video. Now, neurulation is the process where the neural tube forms, and this is about week 3 to 4. And the neural tube is important because later it will form the brain, spinal cord, meninges, as well as part of the bones that surround them. Now, here is a cross-section of the embryo, and there are 3 important layers to remember. These are the ectoderm, mesoderm, and endoderm, and they form early in development. And so the major event of the 3rd week of development is gastrulation. Gastrulation is basically where the 3 primary germ layers, the ectoderm, mesoderm, and endoderm, form and start becoming different types of tissues. So the embryo is like a ball. Cutting a cross-section, the cells of the embryo differentiate into 3 main cell lineage: the ectoderm, mesoderm, and endoderm. Again, so the ectoderm will then differentiate into other things and will essentially give rise to the nervous system and our skin. The mesoderm actually originates from the ectoderm. Mesoderm will form the connective tissue, and then it will also give rise to the bone, the muscles, the urogenital organs, the pleura, as well as the peritoneal linings of the body cavity. The 3rd important germ layer is the endoderm, and this will give rise to the lining of the internal organs, such as the GIT and the lining of the airways. An important structure to know is the notochord, which actually induces neurulation, starts the process of neurulation. And it will then form later in life the nucleus pulposus of the intervertebral disc. So it becomes this. So this is week 3. And by week 4 and 5, you end up with this looking structure. So to imagine what is happening, imagine the ectoderm folding around the endoderm and the mesoderm. The endoderm itself becomes smaller and the mesoderm becomes larger. So from earlier, you have the ectoderm, which has overlapped everything, which makes sense because the ectoderm will become the skin. The mesoderm in the center, which makes sense because it will form the bone, muscles, and connective tissue. And then you have the endoderm, which is small because it forms the lining of the GIT and the airways. Also, there is your notochord again, still hanging and will become part of the nucleus of the backbone. Remember, the nucleus pulposus. During the process, you also see formation of other structures, the somites, which is part of the mesoderm essentially, and will form the bone, muscles, and the connective tissue. And then there's also the neural tube, which comes off the ectoderm. And this, remember, will form the central nervous system. So it will form the brain and the spinal cord, amongst many other things, the meninges. So this is actually the focus of the video, how the neural tube forms, and the process is called neurulation. So back to our first image. This is already week 3, and the process of neurulation is about to begin. Let's zoom into this area here. So here is your endoderm, your ectoderm in blue, and your mesoderm in red. By the end of the 3rd week, the lateral edges of the ectoderm here become more elevated and will form the neural fold. The depressed mid-region is called the neural groove. This whole layer now is actually called the neural plate of the ectoderm. Now we are looking at this front on, but let's take a look at what it looks like from the top. So we're looking at it just from the top. So we are looking at the top of the neural plate. Remember, the process of neurulation gives rise to the brain and the spinal cord. And from the top, the top of the neural plate, you have the cranial, which is the head, and the caudal, which is the tail end. Neurulation advances both cranially and caudally. So it starts from the mid-region. So the end of neurulation, the cranial end, will eventually give rise to the brain, and then going caudally will be the spinal cord. Remember, at week 3, the neural plate gives rise to the neural folds on either end, forming the depression in the midline called the neural groove. Eventually, the neural folds will approach each other and fuse, thus converting the neural plate essentially into the neural tube. And this fusion process typically begins in the middle and advances both cranially and caudally. So neurulation advances both cranially and caudally. Looking at it from head on again, so from the front, looking at it from a different view, what we are seeing are the neural folds meeting, fusing together, and it will form the neural tube as a result. The outer part of the ectoderm will begin moving down and surround the endoderm and the mesoderm, as we talked about. So by the end of week 4, you have the neural tube formed, which again will form the central nervous system. As a neural tube forms, some of the ectodermal cells from the tube migrate to form several layers of cells called the neural crest. The neural crest will give rise to structures that work very closely with the central nervous system, and there's a lot, but they include the peripheral nervous system, spinal and cranial nerves, and their ganglia, the autonomic nervous system ganglia, some of the meninges as well. Of course, the remaining ectoderm will form the skin. Here is the notochord, which actually stimulates the whole neurulation process. Here is the endoderm, which will form the inner mucosal lining of the gut and airway. So let's look at the whole process from the top again, focusing on the neural plate, which we've seen. By week 4, you have something that looks like this. From the cranial to caudal end, all segments of the neural tube is essentially formed. The neural folds have fused. And because the neural tube gives rise to the central nervous system, you can think of the neural tube in terms of sections. So during the rest of embryology development, when the neural tube forms, the spinal cord becomes the spine, the romencephalon becomes the pons, cerebellum, and medulla, the mesencephalon becomes the midbrain, and the prosencephalon, the cerebrum and thalamus. Hope this video made sense. It's quite extreme. Thank you for watching.